Have you ever wondered, what if the sharpest philosophy came from a man no one took seriously? What if a few simple words were enough to expose false wisdom? Can an uneducated thinker outshine those who claim intellectual superiority? In one decisive moment, who was truly wise and who was deceived? And are we ready to face the truth when it speaks from the least expected voice? Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub, Parker Adderson Philosopher by Ambrose Bierce, a classic tale reimagined and rewritten in English, revealing the bitter irony behind true wisdom. Tell me your name. Does it matter much? I'll be losing it at sunrise anyway. Parker Adderson. And your rank? Nothing grand. The brave officers are far too valuable to waste on spying. I'm just a sergeant. And your regiment? You'll forgive me. Revealing that might give you insight into the forces waiting beyond your lines. That's precisely the information I risked everything to uncover, not hand over on a silver platter. You have a sharp tongue. Wait until tomorrow. You might find me dull enough to please you then. How do you know you'll die at sunrise? It's tradition. Captured spies rarely see daylight again. One might call it the delicate etiquette of our trade. The general, renowned, fearsome, a true officer of the Confederacy, allowed himself the faintest smile. Yet it was no friendly gesture. It carried no warmth, no charm, no comfort for anyone in the tent. The spy, his prisoner, caught in the dim flicker of yellow candlelight, felt it not as reassurance, but as warning. The guard standing nearby, silent and tense, sensed it too, an omen, subtle and sharp. There would be no leniency here. This conversation was more than words. It was a trial. And for Parker Adderson, the outcome had already been written in the shadows of the tent. So you admit it, the general said, his voice low but sharp. You are a spy, sneaking into my camp, disguised in a Confederate uniform, trying to gather secrets about my troops. Mostly their numbers. Their deployment I already knew. It's rather bleak. The general's eyes flickered with something like amusement, though it was far from warm. The guard, sensing the weight of his duty, stiffened, making every line of his posture scream discipline. Meanwhile, Parker twirled his gray slouch hat around his finger, surveying the tent with an almost lazy curiosity. The scene was simple, almost painfully ordinary. 8 by 10 feet of canvas formed the walls, lit by a single tallow candle, wedged into the haft of a bayonet and thrust into a pine table. There sat the general, scribbling furiously, as if the spy were invisible. A worn rag rug covered the dirt floor. An aged leather trunk, a spare chair, and a roll of blankets were all that completed the space. In General Clavering's command, grandeur and ceremony were strangers. Austerity had become an art form. At the entrance, a sword belt hung from a sturdy nail, carrying a long saber, a holstered pistol, and, curiously, a bowie knife. The general, when asked, would explain that the knife was a relic from his civilian life, a token of the peaceful days before war claimed everything. Parker took it all in, every detail of simplicity and subtle threat, calculating, observing, waiting. The tent was quiet, but beneath the calm, tension hummed like a living thing. The storm had no mercy. Rain hammered the canvas in relentless waves, a deep, hollow pounding that only those who slept beneath tents truly knew. Violent gusts slammed into the fabric, making the structure groan, shudder, and tug angrily against its ropes, as if it longed to tear free and flee the night. At the small wooden table, the general finished writing. He folded the paper with care, then handed it to the guard. "Tasman," he said, "take this to the adjutant general. Return immediately." The soldier hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the man under arrest. And the prisoner, sir? Do exactly as I said. That ended the matter. Tasman saluted, slipped past the tent flap, and vanished into the rain. Silence settled, thick, uneasy, broken only by the storm. General Clavering turned fully toward Parker Adderson. His face, calm and composed, carried no cruelty now. When he spoke, his voice was almost gentle. "It's a brutal night." "For me," Parker replied quietly, "it certainly is." The general studied him for a moment. "Can you guess what I wrote? I imagine it was worth the ink, and, perhaps vanity speaking, I suspect my name appeared more than once." "It did," the general admitted. "Instructions for an order to be read at Reveille, your execution, and notes for the provost marshal regarding how it should be carried out." Parker nodded slowly. "Then I hope the arrangements are tasteful. I plan to be present." The general stiffened. "Do you have any final wishes, personal matters to attend to? A chaplain, perhaps?" Parker shook his head. "I see no reason to shorten his rest on my account." The general's patience cracked. His voice sharpened, cutting through the storm. "Good God, man, do you intend to face death armed with nothing but humor? Do you understand how serious this is?" Parker met his gaze without flinching. The storm raged outside, but inside the tent, something far quieter and far more unsettling had taken hold. "How could I possibly know?" Parker said calmly. "I've never been dead before. I've heard death described as a grave affair, but never by anyone who's actually experienced it." The general fell silent. There was something about this man, curious, unsettling, that he had not encountered before. Not fear, not defiance, something else. "At the very least," the general said at last, "death is a loss of whatever happiness we possess, and the chance for more." "A loss we'll never be aware of," Parker replied, "and anything we can't feel can be endured without distress, anticipated without fear. You must have noticed, General, that none of the fallen soldiers scattered across your campaigns have ever expressed regret." The general frowned. "Even if being dead holds no sorrow, the act of becoming so, the process of dying, surely causes suffering to anyone still capable of feeling." "Pain is unpleasant, I have agreed. I've never denied it. But the longer one lives, the more pain one collects. What you call dying is merely the final ache. There's no such thing as dying itself." The general raised an eyebrow. "Imagine," Parker continued, "that I try to escape. You reach for the revolver you're politely hiding in your lap." Color rushed to the general's face. He laughed softly, a flash of white teeth beneath the candlelight, dipped his head in acknowledgement, and said nothing. "You fire," Parker went on. "Something enters my body that I never chose to swallow. I fall. I'm not dead yet. I suffer for 30 minutes, pure agony. Then I am dead. But at every single moment during that half hour, I was either alive or dead." He paused. There was no moment in between, no passage, no threshold, no experience called dying. The storm battered the tent harder now, as if the night itself were listening, and for the first time the general was no longer certain who was judging whom. "When they hang me tomorrow morning, it will be no different," Parker said softly. "As long as I'm aware, I'll be alive. And once I'm gone, I won't be aware at all. Nature seems to have arranged this entirely in my favor, exactly as I would have designed it myself." He smiled faintly. "It's all so straightforward that being hanged almost feels unnecessary." When he finished speaking, the tent fell into a deep, unsettling silence. The general sat motionless, his eyes fixed on Parker's face, yet there was no sign that he was listening.
It was as if his gaze stood guard over the prisoner, while his thoughts wandered elsewhere, far away, into darker territory. At last he inhaled sharply. His body shuddered, like a man jolted awake from a nightmare, and he whispered, barely louder than the storm outside, "Death is horrible." It was a strange confession, coming from a man whose profession dealt in death. "That fear," Parker replied evenly, "belonged to our primitive ancestors. They lacked the ability to separate awareness from the flesh that carries it. To them, a body without consciousness was unthinkable, much like a monkey that cannot imagine a house without occupants and assumes a ruined hut still shelters a suffering soul." He paused, letting the words settle. "We fear death now for a different reason. We inherit the fear. We dress it up with elaborate fantasies of other worlds, just as place names breed legends and irrational behavior invents philosophies to justify itself." Parker lifted his eyes to the general. "You may hang me," he said calmly, "but that is where your power ends. You can kill me, yet you cannot sentence me to heaven." The candle flickered. Outside, the storm raged on, and inside the tent, certainty itself seemed to tremble.
The general seemed not to hear him at all. The spy's words had merely nudged his thoughts into unfamiliar territory, and once there, they moved freely, drawing conclusions of their own. The storm had passed. The night, suddenly calm, carried a solemn stillness that crept into his mind, darkening it with something close to dread. Perhaps it was instinct, perhaps foresight. "I would not wish to die," he murmured, "not tonight." If he meant to continue, the moment was taken from him. The tent flap lifted, and an officer stepped inside, Captain Hasterlick, the provost marshal. The general's distant expression vanished at once, replaced by command and clarity. "Captain," he said, returning the salute, "this man is a federal spy. He was captured inside our lines with incriminating documents. He has confessed. What of the weather?" "The storm has passed, sir. The moon is out." "Excellent. Take a squad, escort him to the parade ground immediately, and shoot him." The words had barely settled when a raw sound tore from Parker's throat. He lunged forward, neck stretched, eyes wide with sudden terror. His hands clenched as if grasping for something solid in a world that had just collapsed. "My God!" he gasped, his voice breaking, barely forming words. "You don't mean that! You've forgotten! I am not to die until morning!" "I said nothing of morning," the general replied evenly. "That was your assumption. You die now." "But, General, please," Parker pleaded, panic flooding every syllable. "I beg you, remember, I am to be hanged. There must be gallows built. It will take time, an hour at least. Spies are hanged. I have rights under military law. For heaven's sake, General, consider how short—" "Captain," the general said sharply, cutting him off, "carry out my orders." The moonlight waited outside, and philosophy, so confident, so unshakable, had suddenly found its breaking point. The officer drew his sword, eyes fixed on Parker, and silently gestured toward the tent's opening. For a moment Parker hesitated, but then, with the sudden agility of a cat, he lunged forward. His hands found the bowie knife, wrenched it free from its scabbard, and with a fierce, almost inhuman roar, he hurled the captain aside. In a blur of motion, Parker sprang at the general, tackling him to the ground. The table crashed, the candle flickered and died, and chaos swallowed them. Darkness reigned. The provost marshal leapt to help, but he too was knocked down, tangled in the writhing bodies. Shouts of pain and rage echoed beneath the canvas as limbs struck blindly, fury and fear intertwining in a single violent dance. Outside, Private Tasman returned from his errand. Dimly perceiving the mayhem, he dropped his rifle and seized the canvas at random, pulling, yanking, but his efforts were futile. The struggling forms beneath the tent were hidden from view, locked in a desperate battle. The sentinel, still on duty despite the pandemonium, fired his rifle. The sharp crack split the night. The camp erupted. Drums rolled the long call, bugles blared, and figures emerged from tents and barracks, half-clad and frantic. Men ran, slipping into formation under the cold moonlight, obeying the sharp commands of officers even as chaos swirled around them. Order slowly returned. The general's staff and the escort, working methodically, lifted the canvas, pried the combatants apart, and brought the bloodied, breathless figures to their feet. The storm had passed. The night was calm once more, but the memory of the struggle, fierce and unrestrained, would linger long in the minds of all who had witnessed it. Breathless. Yes, one of them truly was. The captain lay motionless. The handle of the bowie knife lodged grotesquely beneath his chin, the end caught in the angle of his jaw. The hand that had delivered the strike could not free it. Clutched in the dead man's other hand was his sword, still tight in a grip that mocked the strength of the living. Blood streaked the blade from hilt to tip. The general, lifted to his feet, sagged to the ground with a groan before collapsing completely, unconscious. Bruises covered his body, and two sword thrusts, one through the thigh, the other piercing the shoulder, marked the violence he had endured. Parker Adderson, by contrast, had suffered far less. A broken right arm was the most serious of his injuries, the rest were superficial, scratches and bruises from a battle fought against raw human force. Yet he seemed dazed, as if waking from a dream or a nightmare. He shrank from those trying to help, crouched low to the ground, muttering words no one could comprehend. His face, swollen and streaked with blood, was still startlingly pale beneath the tangle of hair, paler than any man in that camp, almost corpse-like. "The man is not insane," the surgeon murmured as he prepared bandages, answering a question from the staff. "He is simply terrified. But who is he, really?" Private Tasman seized the moment, launching into a grand, breathless explanation of the night's events. Every detail, every exaggerated motion, every self-important observation he could recall was shared, yet no one listened. Not a single officer spared him a glance. The general stirred, lifting himself onto one elbow. His eyes swept the camp, finally resting on Parker, crouched near the ending embers of a campfire, still guarded. And with a voice both measured and quiet, he said simply, "Take that man to the parade ground," the general said quietly, "and shoot him." An officer nearby shook his head. "The general is delirious." "He is not," the adjutant general replied firmly. "I have his written memorandum on this matter. He issued the same order to Captain Hasterlick." He gestured toward the lifeless body nearby. "And by God, that order will be carried out." 10 minutes later, Sergeant Parker Adderson of the Federal Army, philosopher, skeptic, and wit, knelt beneath the cold moonlight. Gone was the calm certainty. Gone was the clever reasoning. His words now came broken and senseless as he begged for his life, his voice dissolving into raw terror. 20 rifles were raised. The volley shattered the silence of midnight. As the echo rolled away into the dark, General Clavering, lying pale and motionless beside the glowing embers of the campfire, slowly opened his large blue eyes. He looked around him with gentle curiosity, almost content, and said softly, "How quiet everything has become."
The surgeon exchanged a long, knowing glance with the adjutant general. The general's eyes drifted closed. For several seconds he lay utterly still. Then his face brightened, touched by a smile so peaceful it seemed out of place in a world of war. "I suppose," he whispered faintly, "this must be death." And with that final thought, he slipped away.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.